All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep into Blair Warren's Forbidden Keys to Persuasion.
Ooh, persuasive.
Yeah, are you ready for this one?
Absolutely. This is going to be good.
Okay, so, before we get into picturing any, hypnotic swirls or mind control or anything like that,
Right.
we're going to keep this ethical,
Of course.
but we are going to be looking at how some of these tactics that are, often used by some, let's just say, less than scrupulous characters out there
Mhm.
can actually help you be a better marketer,
Mm.
a better salesperson, a better copywriter, more effective in all those things.
Absolutely. And that's the key takeaway here, right? Is how do we understand these techniques? How do they work?
Right.
So we can responsibly use them to connect with our audience, craft those compelling messages.
Yeah, that's what we want. So no like manipulating unsuspecting customers or anything like that.
Not a chance.
Okay, good.
This is all about using that power of persuasion for good.
I love that.
Whether you're building a brand, selling a product, or just trying to improve your communication skills.
Okay, I am all in. So where does Warren even start with all this?
Well, he dives right into what he calls the ugly truths about human behavior. And these are pretty eye-opening, to say the least.
Okay.
So the first one is that everyone manipulates,
Everyone.
whether they're aware of it or not.
Really?
Yeah, we're constantly trying to influence others, even in those really subtle ways.
Yeah.
The key is to become conscious of those tendencies so we can choose how we use them.
So it's not about like avoiding manipulation altogether. It's more about using it consciously and ethically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he gives a really interesting anecdote about a car salesman who actually, instead of doing that hard sell, he surprised a couple by saying, you know what, I'm glad you're not interested in buying a car right now.
Well, wait a minute. That's like completely counterintuitive. What happened?
I know, right? It threw them off guard because they were expecting those pushy tactics.
Right.
And by being honest with them, he kind of disarmed them and made him seem a lot more trustworthy.
Right.
And guess what? They ended up buying a car from him that day.
Wow. So sometimes the best way to persuade someone is to not try to persuade them at all.
Yeah, it's all about creating that context of trust and authenticity.
Right.
So by not pushing the salesman, actually positioned himself as, that helpful advisor, someone looking out for their best interests.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the second ugly truth that Warren talks about?
Okay, so the second one is that our own moral judgments can actually cloud our understanding of why people do what they do.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he uses the example of the Heaven's Gate cult suicides,
Right.
And our immediate reaction might be to label it as crazy and dismiss it.
Yeah.
But that shuts down any further analysis or understanding.
Right.
So to truly understand human behavior, we have to be willing to look beyond our own judgments.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point, especially, I'm thinking in marketing. If you can't understand your audience, even if you disagree with them, you're not going to reach them effectively.
Right. And this leads into why indirect persuasion can be so powerful.
Okay.
So Warren points out 3 human tendencies that make it really hard to just come right out and say what you want.
Okay.
So the first one is people naturally resist attempts to change their minds.
Right.
Like nobody likes to be told they're wrong.
Nobody likes to be wrong.
The second is they can't resist influence they can't detect.
Interesting.
And finally, people believe their own conclusions more than anything they are told.
I'm starting to see how this all ties into, effective marketing and copywriting. It's not about just like bombarding people with your message.
Right.
It's about subtly guiding them towards a conclusion that they feel like they've reached on their own.
Exactly. Remember the story of Victor Lustig, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he didn't just tell the scrap metal dealer he was a government official.
Right.
He created this whole scenario where the dealer arrived at that conclusion himself.
Oh, wow.
And that self-drawn conclusion sealed the deal.
So it's almost like planting seeds of an idea and then letting them blossom in the person's mind.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that's where attention capture comes in.
Okay.
If you can't grab someone's attention, you've lost them before you even begin.
Right.
So Warren talks about incongruity theory, which plays on our survival instincts by presenting something unexpected.
You mentioned an example with like a radio ad that said something about ranch homes.
Yes. That radio ad that starts with, ranch-style homes are just plain ugly.
I do remember that now.
It makes you stop and think, wait, what?
Yeah.
You're suddenly paying attention to see where they're going with this.
Yeah, that's a great example of how, a skilled marketer can kind of use incongruity to disrupt our autopilot and make us actually listen.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these ugly truths, the importance of subtlety and attention. What else does Warren have up his sleeve?
Okay, well, he introduces the concept of hidden addictions,
Hidden addictions.
which are not your typical dependencies. These are deep-seated psychological needs that drive our behavior.
Interesting.
Yeah, and skilled persuaders know how to tap into these ethically to connect with their audience.
Okay, hidden addictions. This is where things are starting to get really interesting. What are some examples of these?
Well, one is the need to be right. Most people have this powerful need to feel like they're right, even when they're not.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Don't we all?
Yeah, probably.
So a smart persuader might present information in a way that allows the person to feel like they've arrived at the right conclusion on their own.
So back to that self-drawn conclusion thing.
Exactly. Remember Victor Lustig and the Eiffel Tower?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What are some other hidden addictions?
Another big one is the need to be needed.
Oh,
Everyone wants to feel valuable, like their contributions matter.
yeah.
So a marketer might position their product or service as the solution to a problem,
Okay.
making the customer feel like they're part of the solution by choosing to buy. Or they might even solicit feedback to make the customer feel like their input is valued and important.
That's subtle but powerful.
It is.
What other hidden addictions should we be aware of?
The need for power is a major one. People crave a sense of control, even if it's just an illusion of control.
So how can a persuader kind of ethically tap into that?
Think about those classic sales lines like, do you want the red one or the blue one?
Oh, yeah.
Even though the customer is still making a purchase,
Right.
they're given a choice which feeds that need for control.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So these hidden addictions are really about understanding the underlying motivations that drive people's decisions.
Exactly. And when you understand those motivations, you can communicate in a way that resonates on a much deeper level.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to see how these seemingly simple psychological triggers can be so incredibly effective when used correctly, especially in a marketing context.
Absolutely. And there's so much more to unpack. We'll explore how isolation techniques and even ethical gaslighting can play a role in persuasion.
Gaslighting for good.
Yeah, all while keeping things ethical, of course.
Okay, so let's unpack another one of these forbidden keys, and that is the concept of isolation
Ooh,
and how it ties into persuasion.
interesting.
So I think when we hear the word isolation, our minds kind of immediately jump to,
Yeah,
cults
right.
and, those kind of less than savory scenarios.
Definitely.
But it's not always so, blatant or unethical, right?
It isn't, and Warren points this out, that there's kind of this spectrum.
Okay.
So while physical isolation is definitely used by those manipulative groups, psychological isolation is much more subtle and probably a lot more prevalent.
Okay, psychological isolation. So it's like operating beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's something we see all the time, even in our everyday interactions.
Really?
Yeah, one example that Warren talks about is the power of shared secrets.
So like that whole, you and I are the only ones that know this kind of thing.
Precisely. Creating a sense of exclusivity, a special bond between you and the person you're trying to persuade, can make them a lot more receptive to your message.
Yeah, it's almost like you're forming this little in-group that excludes outsiders.
Exactly.
Okay, so I can see how this would be powerful in a marketing context. Like you make the customer feel like they're part of this exclusive club.
Absolutely. And it actually ties into another isolation technique that Warren discusses, predicting the future.
Hold on now. We're not talking about actual fortune-telling here, right?
No, not literally. It's more about planting these subtle seeds of doubt.
Okay.
So let's say you're trying to persuade someone to try a new product. You might suggest that their friends or family won't understand or appreciate its value.
Oh, that's interesting. You're kind of subtly isolating them from their existing support system, and you're positioning yourself as the one who truly gets it.
Right. You become the trusted source of information and validation.
Fascinating. So what are some other ways that we see psychological isolation in action?
Well, Warren shares this interesting story about a psychic healing retreat that he attended.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is that the retreat wasn't actually about teaching psychic healing. They were more focused on creating a series of intense shared experiences.
Like what kind of experiences?
So things like firewalking and chanting.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're bonding over these activities.
It's all about like bonding through these intense, almost ritualistic activities.
Exactly. These shared experiences create this powerful sense of camaraderie and belonging, which makes the participants much more open to the group's teachings.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, brand communities and how brands kind of foster a sense of belonging
Yeah.
to cultivate loyalty.
Absolutely. Think about like those secret menu items or limited edition product releases that create that frenzy.
Right. It's all about making the customer feel like they're part of something special.
Exactly.
Something that, not everyone gets to experience.
Mhm.
Okay, this is all really fascinating. So we've talked about hidden addictions. We've talked about isolation techniques. What other forbidden keys does Warren unlock for us?
Well, he delves into the concept of gaslighting, which might sound a little alarming at first.
Gaslighting. Now, isn't that like straight up psychological manipulation?
That's the extreme version, yeah, and Warren emphasizes that it's wrong and often ineffective.
Okay.
But he actually makes this fascinating point that gaslighting in its more subtle forms can be used ethically and responsibly.
Gaslighting for good.
Yes, especially in persuasive communication.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does that even work?
So it's not about distorting someone's reality.
Okay.
It's more about gently guiding them towards a new perspective or a better understanding.
Give me some examples. How does this ethical gaslighting play out in the real world?
Well, he gives an example of this copywriting technique used by the legendary Joe Sugarman.
Okay.
And Sugarman would intentionally include technical jargon in his ads, even if he knew most of the readers wouldn't understand it.
So he was just like throwing in big words to sound smart.
Not really.
Uh-huh.
Sugarman understood that those technical details, even if they went over people's heads, conveyed expertise.
Okay.
It made people think, this guy really knows his stuff.
Yeah, you're establishing authority without being like arrogant or condescending.
Exactly.
Okay. I can see how that would be powerful.
Absolutely. Another example that Warren gives is alluding to the mysterious.
Ooh.
So hinting at secret knowledge or hidden meanings can position you as a trusted translator of that complex information.
I like that. It's that I know something you don't know, but I'm willing to share it with you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that can really make people lean in and pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other examples?
Yeah. Warren talks about the power of revealing secret admiration.
Okay.
So the idea is to reveal positive things that others have said about someone to boost their self-image and strengthen your relationship with them.
So you're not like directly complimenting them, but you're validating it through a third party.
Precisely. Warren even gives the example of telling his son about how his mom had been bragging about his straight A's to other people.
Oh, wow.
So by revealing his wife's admiration, he actually amplified the positive impact of his son's accomplishments.
So it's almost like you're not manipulating, but you're encouraging and empowering.
Exactly. It's about using these insights into human behavior to create those more meaningful and impactful connections.
This is mind-blowing stuff. We're learning how to subtly capture attention, tap into those hidden needs, and even gently shape perceptions, all while staying on the right side of ethical.
That's the key, right? It's about using this knowledge responsibly with integrity.
Right.
And that brings us to another really fascinating concept that Warren calls psychological ventriloquism.
Psychological ventriloquism. Okay, now that sounds straight out of a spy movie.
It does have a clandestine feel to it.
Yeah.
It's about subtly planting thoughts in other people's minds by controlling the assumptions that they make.
Okay.
It actually builds on that idea we talked about earlier that people rarely doubt their own conclusions.
Right. All right, I'm all ears. How do you actually plant thoughts in someone's mind?
Well, Warren uses some really powerful examples to illustrate this. First, he talks about the infamous Daisy ad from Lyndon B. Johnson's presidential campaign.
Oh, yeah, vaguely. I remember that one.
Yeah.
It was a little girl counting daisy petals.
Yeah.
And then, boom, nuclear explosion.
Exactly. And the ad never actually mentioned Johnson's opponent, Barry Goldwater, by name.
Oh, wow.
But it very effectively painted him as a nuclear warmonger through this carefully constructed imagery and sound.
So they never explicitly told viewers what to think, but they created a context that led them to a very specific conclusion.
Right. And because viewers arrived at that conclusion on their own, it felt much more convincing than anything they could have been told directly.
Like, it's a lot more powerful.
It is.
Any other examples of this psychological ventriloquism in action?
Yeah, so he also discusses this show, don't tell principle in storytelling.
Okay.
And he uses a short film scene as an example. So a married couple is in an elevator. The husband is wearing a hat. The elevator stops. A pretty young woman gets in, and the man takes off his hat. That's it.
Okay, I'm not really seeing the manipulation there.
But that's the brilliance of it.
Okay.
So by simply showing that action of the man removing his hat for the attractive woman, but not for his wife,
Right.
the filmmaker subtly conveys a world of information about their relationship.
Okay.
Viewers instantly make assumptions about the state of their marriage, their feelings, their desires, all without a single word spoken.
Wow, so it's all about implying meaning through action and context?
Exactly. The filmmaker doesn't tell us anything, but we fill in the blanks ourselves.
Wow, that is powerful stuff.
It is. This is the power of psychological ventriloquism.
Okay.
It's about subtly guiding the assumptions that people make, leading them to conclusions that feel like their own.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how all of these forbidden keys can be used in all sorts of contexts, from marketing and sales to, even just everyday conversations.
Absolutely. It's about becoming aware of those subtle cues and influences that shape our perceptions and decisions.
Right.
And this awareness actually allows us to communicate much more effectively and responsibly.
So speaking of communicating effectively,
Yes.
Warren's next forbidden key is something he calls the God complex mindset.
Yes. And I know that might sound a bit intense, but bear with us.
Okay.
This one is all about embodying certain qualities that are often associated with a God complex, but in a way that can actually make you a much more compelling and persuasive communicator.
Okay, this should be interesting. I'm ready to hear about this God complex approach to communication. All right, so let's dive into this God complex mindset. But to be clear, we're not talking about, becoming a narcissistic egomaniac, right?
No, not at all. It's about cultivating certain qualities often associated with a God complex,
Okay,
but in a way that makes you a more powerful and authentic communicator.
gotcha.
So Warren actually breaks it down into 3 key components.
Okay.
The first one is projecting conviction.
So basically just believing in what you're saying.
Exactly. Warren argues that a true belief in your message is really the foundation of effective persuasion.
Okay.
No technique or trick can really substitute for that genuine passion and authenticity.
Right. If you don't believe it, why should anyone else?
Exactly.
It's like, those charismatic leaders who can move crowds with their words. It's that conviction, that passion that's contagious.
Precisely. And that's what you want to cultivate, whether you're, leading a movement or selling a product.
Okay.
It's about tapping into that deeper meaning and purpose behind your message.
It's about finding the why behind the what.
Exactly. And Warren actually references a chapter from Joe Vitale's book, The 7 Lost Secrets of Success, where Vitale talks about revealing the business nobody knows.
Oh, interesting.
It's about, looking beyond the surface level of what you do and understanding how it truly impacts people's lives.
So instead of just listing features and benefits, you're connecting with the deeper emotional needs that your product or service fulfills.
Exactly. That's powerful stuff.
It is.
And that leads to the second element of the God complex mindset, showing genuine concern.
So should we all act like we're everyone's savior?
No, not quite. It's more about approaching every interaction with deep empathy and a genuine desire to help.
Okay.
So when you treat someone as though you're truly invested in their well-being, it disarms them.
It shifts the focus away from your agenda and puts their needs first.
Exactly.
Which can be incredibly persuasive because it demonstrates that you genuinely care.
You got it. And that brings us to the third component of the God complex mindset, giving undivided attention.
Okay, that sounds simple enough. Isn't that just basic courtesy?
It is, but it's more than just being polite.
Yep.
It's about making the other person feel seen and heard, like they are the only person in the room.
Okay.
Warren even uses the example of Adolf Hitler.
Oh boy, here we go.
Now, before you think we've gone off the deep end,
I was just thinking that.
the point he's trying to make is that Hitler, despite being, Hitler was reportedly masterful at making people feel like they were the center of his attention.
Okay.
He would focus all of his energy on whoever he was speaking to, making them feel special and important.
So it's about cultivating that magnetic charisma, that ability to make someone feel like they're the most important person in the world.
Exactly. And while we absolutely do not condone Hitler's actions or ideology, there's no denying the power of that kind of focused attention.
Right, especially in a persuasive context.
Exactly.
Okay, so this whole God complex mindset is really fascinating.
It is.
It's about kind of channeling these powerful qualities, conviction, concern, attention, in an ethical and authentic way to connect with people on a deeper level.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when you do that, persuasion becomes a lot less about manipulation and more about building genuine relationships.
All right, so we've unpacked a lot of these forbidden keys, hidden addictions, isolation techniques, ethical gaslighting, the God complex mindset. What's the final key that unlocks the power of persuasion?
Warren ends with a concept that I consider one of the most important in persuasion, and that's context as communication.
Context is communication. I'm not sure I follow.
So it's the idea that the context in which we communicate is just as important, if not more important, than the words that we use or the body language we display.
Okay.
Warren argues that we often get so caught up in the details of our message that we actually forget to consider the context in which it's received.
Yeah, I mean, the same words can have completely different meanings depending on the situation, who you're talking to, the environment you're in.
Exactly. And Warren highlights how context is subjective. The meaning of any communication depends entirely on the context in which it is received.
Okay.
He takes it a step further and he says that context creates reality.
Whoa.
So our perception of the world is shaped by the context we create both physically and mentally.
Hmm.
Think about how a stage design and lighting can influence the way we experience a concert.
Yeah, it's not just about what you say. It's about the environment you create, the way you frame your message. All of those things play a role.
Absolutely. So Warren gives some really interesting examples of this in action. He talks about how the leaders of that psychic healing retreat we talked about earlier
Right.
created this atmosphere of reverence and importance around a rundown facility simply by establishing certain rules and rituals.
So even though the place was a dump, they created a context that made people perceive it as special.
Exactly. It shows how powerful context can be. Warren also talks about Tony Schwartz, who created that Daisy ad that we talked about. And Schwartz was a master of understanding context. He knew that the American public was already primed to fear nuclear war.
Right.
So he created an ad that tapped into that existing fear without having to explicitly attack his opponent.
So instead of trying to change people's minds, he worked with the existing context to achieve his goal.
Exactly. And this is where Warren's teachings get really practical. He introduces a framework he calls contextual message analysis and design, or CMAD, as a tool for planning and strategizing effective communication.
Okay, break it down for me. How can we actually use this?
So it's a 5-step process. The first step is you analyze your message.
Okay.
What are the key benefits? What needs does it address? What's that core idea you're trying to convey?
So start with a clear understanding of your message. Got it.
What's next?
Step 2 is to define success. How will you measure the effectiveness of your communication? What does a win look like for this particular message?
All right, so set clear goals and metrics. Makes sense. What about step 3?
Understand your prospect. This is crucial. You need to deeply consider their context, their needs, beliefs, values, and potential points of resistance.
So know your audience.
Exactly. The more you understand your audience, the better you can tailor your message to resonate with them.
Okay.
Step 4 is to identify the message components. So based on your analysis so far, what are those main points you need to convey?
Okay.
And how will you present them in a way that aligns with your prospect's context?
You're crafting the message to fit that specific audience in that specific situation.
Exactly.
Got it. What's the final step?
The 5th step is convey, don't say.
This builds on everything we've discussed today.
Right.
It's about finding those subtle, indirect ways to communicate your message. So instead of stating things outright, you're using stories, actions, implications to guide your audience towards that desired conclusion.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has.
I feel like we've unlocked this whole new level of understanding when it comes to persuasion and how these forbidden keys, when used ethically, can be so powerful for marketing and sales and copywriting to create these truly compelling messages.
Absolutely. I agree. It's been such a fascinating exploration of human behavior and that subtle art of influence.
Yeah.
And I think Blair Warren would be proud of us for using his forbidden keys for good.
I think so too. So to wrap things up for our listeners, what is one key takeaway you think they should keep in mind as they kind of navigate this world of persuasion?
You know, just pay attention to the context of your interactions. Notice those subtle cues, the unspoken assumptions, the ways that context is shaping your perception and influencing your behavior. Because once you become aware of those forces, you can start to use them to your advantage, both personally and professionally.
That is a great takeaway for our listeners. So on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Blair Warren's Forbidden Keys to Persuasion. We'll be back next time with another fascinating exploration of ideas that matter. Till then, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for joining us on the deep dive.